Hello, Bob Niels here again, and welcome to Database Design, adding a primary key to each entity. The objectives of this particular video is to understand what is a primary key, how to determine the primary key, and then finally applying the primary key to your ERD. All right, so primary key. We've been fooling around with some of those words a little bit last week and the week before, but it's a very important concept when it comes to database design and also implementation. A primary key of an entity uniquely identifies each instance of that entity. Remember that whole that talk about instance, that basically that student or that instructor or so on. It is a key that uniquely identifies it. The primary key is a single representation of all of the attributes of that entity. So in a sense, this key represents everything that makes up that particular instance. The first name, last name, social security number, date of hire, so on, all those pieces. It ensures row level accessibility. That might not make any sense right now, but later on it will. Trust me, very quickly it will. It means that we can go get the data we need very, very quickly. And later, this key will be used to establish the relationships between the entities. We know what the relationships are, but we physically need to be able to establish those. And we will get into that pretty much starting in the next couple weeks. A primary key must be unique per entity. So since it's going to represent each individual instance of that entity, it must be unique. So you and I, if we're both students, cannot share the same primary key. You can use existing attributes that could represent the instance of an entity. For example, student ID. All of you are students at Cincinnati State. You all have unique student IDs. Social security number should be unique also, even though I've heard stories that's not absolutely true. Anyway, these potential keys are called candidate keys. If you actually got into some books and read more about keys, these are potential keys that we could actually use. They're candidates to be the primary key. Oops, sorry about that. Or you can create a new attribute that serves its sole purpose to be the primary key. It would take on the name of the entity and then follow with an ID, for example, a student ID, course ID, and instructor ID. And let's not confuse the student ID with your student ID that you have for the college. This would just be an ID that would be used to represent that instance. These are called surrogate keys. Basically, these are keys that has nothing to do with anything. They're by themselves. Their sole purpose is nothing more to be a genuine, unique identifier for the instance, for each instance of an entity. The data type of all primary keys for this course will be a number. So we got to give it a data type also. It'll always be a number. And the final thing I should say that I don't believe I had there is that for this particular course, we're going to use surrogate keys, okay? So make note of that. We will not use candidate keys. We're going to have a unique key that has a sole purpose only to be the primary key for each instance of an entity. Does that make sense? So this will be really easy. It's going to take on the name of the, I'm going to go back here. It's going to take on the name of the table, I'm sorry, of the entity, and then you just want to put an ID to it. And like I said, for the purpose of this course, we will only use surrogate keys. All right? Okay. So with that said, let's go learn how to apply that to our Visio. So I'm going to pull that up. And for the sake of being very, very simple, we're going to look at each entity and we're going to create a brand new attribute, if you will, that will be defined as the primary key. Well, already we have this nice little row here called attribute name with the primary key already in there. So if I press this, I want that surrogate key called student ID, and we'll name it just like this. And of course, let me get back to this one more time, sorry. We want to put the data type in there, which will be a number. All right? It's kind of easy if you get to the point that you want to move things around. Look how we can set this as a primary key, first name here, and so on. So we don't have to have, the primary key doesn't have to be in the first row, if you will, of these particular entity relationship diagrams. And so if you discover you created a field or an attribute, I should say, let me get this up here, an attribute, whoops, a hard time all of a sudden. There you go. And I press this, maybe, come on. There we go. I can turn off the primary key just like that, or later on I can sit back and go back to it with a right click and very easily, hopefully, very easily, maybe it's not as easy as I hoped it was going to be. There we go. We can set it just like that. That was kind of hard to actually show you that. I apologize. So for courses, the same concept. We're going to come over here and have a course ID, and it is going to be a number. And finally, we're going to come down here and we're going to have an instructor ID, and it will be a number also. Whoops. And it just so happens that the primary key, a little box with PK on there, is saying that's what it is. So again, the primary key is this unique identifier. It's an attribute uniquely identifies the entire instance. So basically represents, if you would, the entire entity and all its characteristics and all its attributes. I hope that makes sense. We're going to talk about primary keys throughout this course. So you'll hopefully this is just the first introduction to it, and hopefully it makes a little sense as you get done. Now, what's kind of cool about this, now we have everything on here. We're pretty much complete with our entity relationship diagram, are we not? So now as we designed our database, we have our three entities, we have our attributes, we have our data types, and we know our primary keys. Starting next week, we're going to take this information and now put that physically into a database management system, specifically SQL Server. And so we start adding it all in there, and we start building our databases. With that, I want you guys to try all this now. I want you to try building interrelationship diagrams. I want you trying new problems and going from there. And that's what the activities are for this week. So have fun with that.